team. It's beautiful to worship together in this forum. Love you guys, Calvary, and because of our love for you and student development, our goal is growth. And today I'm so excited that we have one of our favorite speakers, one of my favorite speakers. I've had lots of students reach out and say, hey, could we do this again? I am thankful that the director of our graduate biblical counseling program, decided to come today, Dr. Jeff Cox.
You always like to be asked to speak, especially twice. It means you weren't so controversial last time that you got banned, so that's good. So I'm going to tell you up front, what I'm going to talk about this morning won't sound encouraging. Just give me a chance. It can be encouraging, but it's going to sound like it's not. So I was a student pastor for many years, high school, junior high, and I had a friend that was kind of a leader with me, and his name was Rusty Fracassa. And I had Rusty's son in my youth ministry. His name was Tyler. And as the story goes, I remember sitting down many years later and having lunch with Rusty. And Tyler died. He died in a car wreck unexpectedly. He was in his 20s. He was married, had children, and didn't know at the time, but his wife was pregnant. So I'm sitting at lunch, and it was a Summit Grill over in Lee Summit, and talking to Rusty. And he works in elder law. And if you don't know what that is, that's when people get older and they do wills and trusts and things like that. And he looked across the table at me and said, you know, Jeff, he said, I know the statistics on how many parents are preceded in death by their children. At the same time, if you don't know, I'm also get to work with the counseling center at Abundant Life. I think we have 35 counselors now, and we do probably now 12,000 sessions a year. And you say, well, people are always dealing with pain, but I'm going to tell you, I don't know of a greater pain than we deal with than a parent losing their child, especially when it's young. I mean, that will tear you up. So I'm sitting across the table from Rusty, and he just says, you know what? I know because I've worked in elder law with people when they're getting older and we're doing wills, estates, and trusts, how many of them have already lost a child? And the complication that comes from that, you know, with estates and going to grandchildren and all of that. And I'm sitting there listening to Rusty talk about that, and God's done a work in his life in healing, and I never forgot what he said. And he said to me, he said, you know what? I know the statistics. And he said, a lot of people, when things happen to them, they say, why? And he looked across the table at me and he said, you know what I said? Why not me? And I can tell you, sitting across the table from it, that was hard for me to hear. That was heavy, that he even had that perspective. And I'm not going to teach on the book of Job this morning. But I thought, how does that work in his life? So you say, what happens when people come to counseling a lot of times? And a lot of times what we're doing is with them helping them fight for perspective. Okay? We're helping them fight for perspective. And what I'm going to share this morning are 5 truths that'll help set your perspective. Now I'm going to let you know right now, if I advertise these, no one would show up. This isn't the kind of things you hear, hey, how to have a wonderful life. You know, there's nothing you're going to hear this morning that is going to build your self-esteem. Now, you can get that somewhere else, you know, just jump on social media afterwards and take a selfie and get a few likes. You can get that. But you're not going to get anything this morning to do that. But you say, why are you sharing this? I learned this years ago. Scazzero's the name, and he wrote a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's a quote from someone else if you want to read this kind of stuff. But he said, people who have been through great pain in their life know 5 things are true. And it's like this anchor for their life. And like I said, no one would entitle a sermon these things, okay, because no one's going to pay attention to it. But, you kind of got to be here, so here we go. But these 5 things. I'll say this. Years ago, a guy who wrote all the Boundaries books, it's Henry Cloud, John Townsend, he wrote a book called Integrity, and I never forgot this. He says this: the definition of integrity for him was the courage to meet the demands of reality. So here's what I hope to share this morning with you. And I know them by memory, so I don't need notes, okay? But if you even remember 3 of these, and during this season of life, if you will take them to heart, they can settle you and equip you to be in ministry, to sit across from people, to deal with people in their pain, and to be honest with you, just to keep you from crashing, okay? Because what's the difference? I'm sitting across the table from a Rusty. He experienced the same pain with the loss as someone else. But he's fought for perspective. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he doesn't have loss. I'm not saying he's still not sad. I'm not saying he still doesn't grieve in ways that I will never understand, because I've not experienced that. But it hasn't derailed his life, okay? So I'm going to give you the 5 things, all right? Number 1, life is hard. I didn't think it was for me, because mine kind of worked out for me. I came from a Christian home, a real one. My mom and dad are still alive, still love each other. My friends used to tease me as I got older. You won't understand this because of your age, but there was a show years ago, Leave It to Beaver, and they said, that's kind of your world. I grew up in that. And so you kind of think it's okay. But the reality is, for everyone, eventually life is going to get really hard. For some of you, you've already experienced it, meaning what I just shared with you, you're saying, that ain't my home. That's not my parents. In the world we live in through counseling, where you're really sitting with people in pain, all the neglect, all the abandonment, all the abuse, all the suicidal ideation, all the addiction, all of those things. The reality is, eventually you're going to learn this fact that life is very, very hard. Is what Genesis talks about with the fall. And the reason I say that to you just at the front is this. We're then surprised when it gets what? Hard. So I've sat across from Rusty, and he's talking about, which is the thing, he says his life's going along, he's successful, an attorney, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, he's taking care of his grandchildren, his son is gone. If you live long enough, you'll learn that the reality of this world is that it's hard. Why do I share that? Because a lot of times when we're sitting with people in counseling and therapy, to be honest with you, they're surprised it's hard. They're just surprised it's hard. So that's number 1. Number 2, here we go. You're not that important. So look to the person next to you. This is one thing you do. Look at him, say, you're not that important. All right, now, this is where there's that tension, okay? And this is the one you'll probably remember the most, okay? So where do you get this from? So here's the reality. Some of you, and if we do questions at the end, you're going to raise your hand. Am I not special to God? Psalm 139, am I not uniquely created? If you depend on what you do with sovereignty, am I not chosen? Didn't we just sing stuff like that? Okay. But in my world, if you should all become counselors, by the way. But anyway, if you would say, well, what's your genre or where you go from? It's called existentialism and not humanistic stuff. It's from the book of Ecclesiastes, where I think Solomon wrote it, but Koheleth, the author. And it's about life under the sun. It's not about eternity. It's not about heaven. You got maybe one glimpse in the book about eternity, about God putting an age in your heart. But it's really about this life down here. And one thing you'll realize going through that book is you're not that important. You say, why is that so important to realize? Because switch these. If you live your life not believing what I say, what's going to happen to you? So let's just go with number 1 first. Hey, here's what I want to tell you all this morning. Life's not that hard. Cake, you got it. Go. There's something in you that knows that's not what? True. That's not reality of this world. What if I were to say this? I want to tell you about this world down here. You're very, very important. Until someone breaks up with you. Until you get fired. till you didn't get what you think was owed to you. Until this comes along, this wasn't fair. You say, well, are you telling me to live with like no self-esteem and that like, I'm just pathetic, your parents go, I love you so much, you shouldn't, I stink. No, I'm not talking about that. But if you live your life with this inflated idea that I'm what? Important, the reality of this world will show you very soon that you're not. Now, you say, what can happen? From there, you can serve. From there, you can die to self. From there, you can have reasonable expectations. But if you live on the other side thinking you're important, you will continually be offended in your life and reminded that you're not. You will. I used to work at a church in Kansas City. It was called Kansas City Baptist Temple. We had ball fields. We still do. They still have them. We used to have this, youth league every year where like 600-700 kids would come play baseball. And the founder of the church was a pastor by the name of Wendell Zimmerman years ago. And so now we're talking decades later, and I remember, and I was the executive pastor there at the time, and someone said, we would like to name the ball fields after that pastor. Hey, I think that would be great. So we made a plaque, and we put it outside the gate. And we called it Zimmerman Park. Well, we tried to. How many people do you think knew who that was? 700 kids walking into that ball field. They didn't even call it Zimmerman Park. We couldn't even pull that off. They just called it Church's Lot or Church's Ball Fields. You say, well, that's kind of a depressing thing. No, it's reality. So once again, Ecclesiastes says, whether you're righteous or you're wicked, your memory will soon be what? Forgotten. Now, I happen to work at a large church. It's called a mega church. I get that. Probably 6,000 people. And I remember I was talking to one pastor there one day, and this kind of humored me, and he said, well, I'm really worried about this. He goes, I'm kind of worried about my legacy here. And me being the nice counselor I am, let's walk through this. There's only probably one human being in the place that even remotely is going to have that kind of legacy, and it's going to be like the senior pastor. And even he, after he's gone, will be replaced within a year, and that's the reality. And you say, why tell you that? Why do we have a chapel speaker coming and telling me I'm not that important? Because I'm saving you living the lie that you think you are. Now, with eternity and God and His plan, I get it, but under the sun here, if you're easily offended, you're easily hurt, you're easily being left out of a group and it bothers you, you don't think you have, the reality is if you can change this perspective, number one, was life's going to be hard, number two is I'm not that important, it changes it all. You will serve and minister and love, I am a romantic, from a place of freedom instead of expectation. You think they're bad now, they're going to get worse. Number three, it's not all about you. Now, what do I mean by that? I drove over here from church. I got on the highway for a second. Here's how I live my life. Just me. I know you're better than this, but here's how I live my life. I'm driving down the highway. People are in other cars around me. You know what they are? They're minor characters in my movie. They don't really exist except when they're passing me, so there's some filler going on in my life. You say, that's ridiculous. But it's how we live. Basically, right now, and this is really hard not to do, you all have a perspective that you're seeing. You're listening to me from your perspective, your ears seeing me with your eyes, and there's, 90 other people in the room. I don't know what it is. Who is the central character to your story? You tell me. You are. And these are all other supporting characters, but they're not. You say, why is this so important? Think of any conflict or problem you have in your life. You're going to see it from whose perspective? Yours. Always. What does this change? You're not the only story that's happening. You're not the only story that's happening. How does this work out in real life? So, representing region. Good. So, here we go. Region is a recovery thing we have at our church. And what happens is, walk through 12-step program, Christ-centered, and people have sponsors. And oftentimes when you're going through recovery and you're hurt and you're struggling with things, you'll talk to your sponsor. And you'll say, hey, this happened to me with so-and-so. This happened to me with so-and-so. We got in a fight. It'd be like, we got in a conflict. And I'd go, this student here, I can't stand her. She likes Navy, can't stand that. Not interested in her, and she's offended me. Look, you're already offended. That wasn't hard. By the way, you're not that important. No, just joking. Here we go. And I'm going through here, and here's what my sponsor would be. Sponsor would come up as I'm telling the story. Hey, Jeff, before you tell me what this person's done to you, I want you to answer this for me. What do you own in this? Now, I'm already willing to listen to how this person's offended you, or this person's hurt you, or this person's treated you, or this isn't work. You know what I'm saying? But let's begin with what you own in it. You know what they're trying to do? Get me to see it from the perspective of another what? Person. Any conflict you're having in your life, or anytime you're feeling slighted or something like that, you're not the only story that's happening. My professor is ridiculous. He didn't say what he should have said in this situation, didn't grade this fairly. It's my universe. But the professor, and I'm not saying this because I am a professor, I'm not, but they have a story going on in their life too. To even be curious about that is liberating. Okay? See, what does Ecclesiastes talk about? It eventually talks about these verses like cast your bread upon the water and things like this, meaning to be generous with our life, meaning it's not just our story. Now, I won't go too much into this, but we have a very individualistic view of Christianity, my walk, my personal relationship with God. That's what I heard. And, I'm going to date myself, the 70s and the 80s. And we view it that way. It's our story. Where the more scriptural way to view it is, it's his story. I'm not using that cliche like history. I'm saying there's a story, and there's all of our stories in that. Meaning it's not me following Christ, and that's the end of it all. It's we're following Christ. It's not I'm seated in heavenly places. We, community, plural, are seated. It's not just my story. So number one, life is hard. Number two, you're not that important. Number three, it's not all about you. Number four is this: you can't control anything. Now, wait a second. I'm in control of my will, and I'm not going to get into deep theology. Yes, and despite what I'm not jumping into weird theology here. I'm not going to bash Calvinism this morning. I'm not, but here we go. But even the choices you make are influenced by things that were out of your control. I'm a big Kansas City Chiefs fan. Too much. Okay? Why am I a Chiefs fan? I just, of my own free will and volition, was dropped into the universe and decided I would be that. No. I was born in Missouri. I was born around people who liked football. I married somebody that if I'm not a fan will kill me. I don't completely have the choices. Okay? So Ecclesiastes has this very famous passage. It's a famous passage because it was a rock song back in the 60s too, but there's seasons to life. A time to dance, a time to live, a time to love, and all those things. And what we think is, I'm just going to pick my life. But the author of Ecclesiastes is really saying there's these predetermined, guess what, in your life? Seasons. It's talking about his sovereignty. And you say, what does this have to do with me? So here's your little counseling tidbit. I'll give you this one thing. The more you try to control things you can't, which usually means we're trying to control other people, the more you will lose control of yourself. Parents. So parents who they have their prodigal children. That's all of you. Just joking. But here we go. They come into counseling, and they want counseling about their adult children. And I would say more often than not, what they're wanting to do is still control their adult children. And you're trying to lead them to the place you can't. And they're upset about it. They have anxiety about it. They're frustrated about it. They're burdened about it. And I get being hurt, but the reality is they think they can control their children. Here's what they don't get. They never could. You say, well, I'm in control of what I say. That's not what James says. I can't even control my tongue. Well, I have this volition. You do. But your idea that you're sovereign of anything is not true. And the more you live your life like you can control something, the more you'll lose what? Control of yourself. I struggle with anxiety. What are you trying to control? I struggle with anger. What are you trying to control? Well, how do we do it? All sorts of ways. Manipulate, passive aggressiveness, withdraw, avoidance, all the things we try to do to manipulate people. But you know what we're always trying to do? Control and control outcomes. The most you say. Why am I talking about this so specifically? Because one of my biggest struggles is I know this. When I'm angry or I'm anxious, almost every time I can ask myself this question: what am I trying to control? I'm not saying I don't make good choices. I'm not saying I don't have boundaries. I'm not saying that I don't love. But the reality is I cannot control people. I remember I was fighting with my wife once, and she was going to make a choice I didn't want about where she was working. And I'm going through this whole thing with her, and I'm saying, well, this isn't going to be this way. This isn't going to be this way. This isn't going to be this way. And you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't say this, and all of these things. And she just looked at me, and she knows me well. And she goes, you're right. Yeah, it's about time. And I forgot what she said. But it's not your problem. She knew exactly what I was trying to do. I'm trying to do everything I can in my power to try to control what? Her. You're not in control of anything. And here's the last one to leave on a good note. You're going to die. I know someone's going to give a question. How does that? I'm living for the rapture. Thank you, spiritual person. Get it? I'm with you. But you're going to die. Ecclesiastes talks about that a lot. So I'll give you the illustration. There's this word, havel, translated vapor in some translations of the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a tricky word, and now I'm a little intimidated because my former Hebrew teacher is in the class, so I will go through. It's a tricky word. It's very tricky. I've seen a lot of English translations of it. Meaninglessness, that's kind of a stretch. But I'll give you two roots that put the word together, and I think some translations it's vapor. One is transitory, meaning it's brief, and the other is it's without substance. Now, if you can find a good English word for that, go for it. They try. It's not meaninglessness, meaning the point of Ecclesiastes is your life has no meaning. That's not the point. But I'll give you an illustration, and I will say this. The book of Ecclesiastes is not written to me. Wait, it's the Bible. It is kind of, but it's really not. Because there's this little thing over there, and it says, remember your Creator in the days of your what? You can do that. Now, I can't go into a time machine and go back. I can teach you to do that, but I can't do that. So I'll leave with this one little thing, hopefully to encourage you. Because this isn't about eternity in Ecclesiastes. You're going to die. Well, that's depressing. Not really. The people understand that the best will live this life to the most. So I had this little corny thing I did when I was a student pastor I started years ago. I had started out with middle school. It was junior high back then. And if they read through the Bible in a year, I would take them to Worlds of Fun. Now, we're in Springfield, Missouri. All we did down there was haul hay and do barn swings. Roller coasters were a big deal back then. So we'd bring all the students up here, live in a hotel, get to spend the night up here, then we'd take them to Worlds of Fun, the theme park. I never forgot. We'd get up there, and we'd probably get there, the park would usually open probably about 9. And then we'd stay till the park closed, which was probably about 10, and then get them home about 1 or 2 in the morning. And this was my speech as a student pastor. All right, you need to be back here at 10 o'clock. And then I would do this very dramatic thing, because every student who was late would always make this excuse. I didn't have a watch. This was before cell phones. And I would take my watch off very dramatically and give that to somebody else. And I would go, I'm going to have no watch, but I'm going to be back on the bus on time, okay? Really this big deal. So it's like 9 in the morning, and they have till 10, so that's 11 hours, okay? But there's a time this day ends. It's at 10 o'clock. There's a time this is going to end. And here you go. Go. If you were an energetic, self-aware student that knew eventually 10 o'clock's coming, what would you do at Worlds of Fun that day? And you really got 2 choices. You can fret that it's only 11 hours, or you can do what? you can go ride the rides. Tick-tock, tick-tock. And I'm not saying Jesus couldn't come back now, but I'm sticking with Ecclesiastes. You're going to die. Are you wasting your life? The point of Ecclesiastes is this is a gift. And the greatest thing the author, who I think Solomon says numerous times you can do, is enjoy it. Enjoy the fruit of your labor. Eat, drink, and be merry. That's not talking about gluttony. You find a wife, that's great, okay? Or a spouse. But he's saying tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. You're going to die. How intentional are you about living and enjoying this life God's given you? It's going to be hard. You're not that important. It's not all about you. You can't control anything, and you're going to die. Those sound depressing. They're not. They're liberating. Because if you spend your life thinking it's not hard, and you're important, and it's all about you, and you can control everything, and you're not going to die, I'll charge you $100 an hour to cancel you. Because it won't work out for you. But if you can take those 5 things, and I get there's tensions in the Bible and all that with it, and you can grab a hold of those 5 things, it will liberate your life to live it freely. That's my hope for you.
We've got a little bit of time here. Thank you.
Good deal.
Waiting on questions. Love to see some questions come through. I know there are things on your hearts as you're thinking about this today. Woo! Thank you for those 5 truths. I didn't know you were speaking on hope today.
That's good.
I'm wondering, as I'm listening, I'm wondering how those truths about self affect our interactions with each other.
I find when I'm offended or I'm in a conflict with somebody, that my view of how important I am is elevated. I think of like I'm on a staff, we got 90 people on our staff. When people aren't getting along, like maybe I didn't get acknowledged the way I wanted to, or there's responsibilities given out and I really wanted to do that, and I find that I'm in a perpetual state of being hurt, being injured. I'm living from the standpoint of how important I am. Now, I want to balance this. It doesn't mean you're a doormat and you should be abused. I'm not talking about you still have to have boundaries. But I think we're all, I even think of, it's funny, like I said I was a Chiefs fan. Matthew, safety this year. If you're not a Chiefs person, that's okay. He might not be back. Well, he's really important. He's important for a season, for a team, but really he'll move on quickly. You almost have to approach life with under the sun here. I'm talking about. I'm not talking about you're not special and important to God. I'm not talking about that. I would say this too, and this is kind of a little caveat. What should I focus on if it's not to be important? Focus on being useful. Which, actually, I'll commend you for this, seriously. I'll give you something. Just the fact you're sitting here going to college, seriously, you're working on being useful. Be useful at something. Your skill, what you want to do, your giftedness, be useful at it. The other things will take care of themselves. Obsess about that, not about how important I'm going to be.
That's great. Yeah, Adam.
You mentioned boundaries and not being a doormat. How does a Christian find the balance between setting up boundaries with the concept of if your friend asks you to go 1 mile, go 2?
I would say, well, with importance, I think you really have, that's 2 different things. That's a lot of humility, if you understand the context of what Romans would be. But I always say this, boundaries is really a pretty simple concept in this. I'm responsible to you, but not for you. So you have to ask yourself this, is this something reasonable that Christ as his servant would do for somebody. Okay? And that I am responsible to you. But when it goes over to like I'm going to keep doing things, maybe enabling and things like that, usually we've crossed over I'm responsible for you. And so that's usually the thing we go to. I'm responsible to you, which is what I'm supposed to be, a loving, gracious, kind person. I'm not responsible for you. So you say with the things I'm doing crossing over into I'm becoming responsible for them, if that makes sense. I mean, this is kind of a hard thing to share, but my wife's dad, my father-in-law, is having some pretty serious heart problems, okay? So we went down over the weekend and spent like the whole weekend setting them up, getting prescriptions, getting oxygen. I mean, the whole, talking to doctors, everything. Set up, here's the pills for the certain day. But can I make them take the pills, change the diet? No. I'm responsible to them. I've done everything I possibly can. But I'm not responsible what? For them. And that's where the boundary comes. Does that help? Yeah, so.
Great. I've got a couple that have come in here. What are some of your favorite verses for when life's out of control?
At the beginning of 2 Corinthians, we're comforted by the comfort wherein God comforts us, is huge like that. Romans 8 is cliche. I get that all things work together, but here's the tricky part of the verse. That is a comforting verse to me, but here's when life seems out of control, my prime objective is to get life back in control. God's prime objective when it talks about all things work together for good is that I would be conformed to the image of his son. And that's the biggest tension, because me being conformed to the image of Jesus is not really, if I'm honest, that high a priority for me. I say it is until pain enters my life. So when life's out of control, what I do is I say this: God is trying to accomplish something in me. Now, I don't throw verses out as cliche. I'm going to memorize it and, put it up on my mirror in the morning and quote it, and that does it. I wrestle with it and have to work through it, but that's okay. Not necessarily a verse, but the entire narrative of Joseph. He would have never chose that path. And the things that happen in your life that seem chaotic, that aren't people with your best interest, that God, in his sovereignty, orchestrates it for ways. The people who minister in, regions like this recovery program we've talked about, the people who are standing up, sharing their testimonies, helping other people have been through unbelievable, painful times in their life. The whole cliche, I believe this, your pain's not for you, it's for someone else. And just, okay, I have that. You say, well, that's not enough for me, so I'll give you the hard part. There's nothing else out there. If you don't grab a hold of Christ in some purpose, there is nothing else except accidents happen to you in your life and it's just bad. And so when it's out of control, and I do believe it's because it's the Word of God, but if you don't have that, I promise you there's nothing else out there. Maybe some dorky karma thing, but there's nothing else. So, if you believe in karma, no offense.
How do you balance taking care of yourself, sleeping, eating, resting, with living life to the fullest for God's glory?
That's good. That's a good question. One of our pastors was actually talking about resting and doing that. The reason I share Ecclesiastes is my favorite book in the Old Testament. It just is. And I think Ecclesiastes provides this balance. So yes, I will work, and this is the time I'm going to work, and this is the time I'm going to rest. And for me in this season of life, this is the time I'm going to be with my grandchildren. And, I've learned boundaries, when to say no to things like that. But you're in a difficult season. I remember going back to school as an adult. I never really liked school. Well, you did it a lot. I sure did. I wasn't very disciplined. I mean, when I got my doctorate, you need to study this much and read this much and do it every day. That was horrible. I wouldn't do anything for a month, have anxiety, then binge for a weekend and write the dissertation and say I'm going to do better. Then I wouldn't do anything for a month, get anxiety again, binge for a weekend to do better. It worked, but it wasn't a way to manage your life in a healthy way. Jackie's laughing back there. She sends me a million emails. I don't pay attention to them. Then at the last minute, I'm getting everything. I'm not a good role model in this area. But I will say this. She knows it's true. So, but I would say this for you. How do I do it? The things I do take serious. I do exercise still. I do get up and run in the morning. I still have boundaries. I do take sleep seriously. I think it's a myth that we get by on less than 7 hours. I don't think we're created that way. So all those things I take serious and try to do them. So.
Okay, so I need a 30-second counseling session.
All right.
I coach a sport, and coaches tend to say things like, "You can control your energy. You can control your attitude. So help me."
All right. So here's the thing. To a degree, that's kind of true, but I will say this. Okay, so I'll give you this analogy. Why do we need to be in healthy community? The reality is, yes, we do have volition, we do have choice, and I decide whether or not I'm going to study. I do have control. But the reality is I'm not in complete control. And so the control would be volition to put myself in a place. There's this psychological principle, and it's this. So this is psychology, but it's true biblically, or we wouldn't be in church. But it's basically this: my personality plus my environment will result in my behavior. Okay. Well, is that true or not? Well, why do we need to be in healthy community and church? So you think of the foster care system. Why can this child be removed from this home? And nothing has really been done to change their life, but just a new home helps them. Okay, so I would say this. Yes, we can make choices. We're responsible for our choices. We do have volition, but it's not just us and just this honesty. And usually when I'm teaching it is, we usually try to control someone else. So like for the coach, I would say this. You can motivate your team. You can encourage your team. You can speak truth to your team, but can you control your team? You cannot. And if you try to, you'll lose control of yourself. What is marriage counseling? Usually marriage counseling is two people trying to control each other a lot. And what about the parent counseling for their adult children who are doing right? We have a joke in counseling, we call it "My will be done." Meaning the parent comes in, well, I want them to follow the Lord and all this stuff. But by the end of the session, no, you want them to do exactly what you want them to do in their life. And it's a story, I'll tell you this one real quick. Henry Cloud shares a story, it's funny. A dad comes in to see him about his adult son, and he's like, got an addiction, and I don't know what it is, we'll make something up. Not something really serious. We'll say it's fentanyl, okay, not like meth or anything. And he's like, no offense, sorry, he said, so we're going through it, and not that that's not a good addiction either, I deal with all of them, okay? But we're going through it, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking through this, and so he's talking, and it's kind of interesting, and he's like sitting there and goes, my son is, he dropped out of school. And Henry Cloud's sitting there talking to him and saying, okay, what can you do to help him? And Henry Cloud, well, what have you done? Well, he dropped out of school, and then, I really had to work to get him into another school. Henry Cloud's, okay, well, then what happened after that? Well, he didn't really want to do that anymore, and so, he just kind of checked out from that school too, and he's struggling with addiction. And Henry Cloud goes, okay. And then, okay, what's going on right now? Well, he's skiing. It's a true story. I think he's skiing in Colorado. And Henry Cloud goes, okay. He says, can you help my son? And he goes, no, but I can help you with your problems. And he goes, I don't have any problems. And he goes, your son's dropping out of school, living off you still skiing. You're in my counseling office. Who has the problem? The reality is, part of not controlling people is give their problems back to who? To them. And you not trying to control the outcomes. And I will say this, think of how many times Jesus asked a question or just let them be. You know what I'm saying? It's not like he ended in these huge debates. He told them the truth. He told them what could happen. Told them the results. But, it was their choice. And but the beauty of that is if we run away from God, this world's not set up to reward us for that. So, anyway.
Amen. I'll have my payment ready after we pray. Let's pray.
All right.
God, thank you so much for this day that you've created and how you use your people for the good of your body. And God, I pray that you would just